Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far from your cozy bed, straight into the silent sands of ancient Egypt. You might think this is just another history story, but trust me, by the end, you'll feel the desert dust cling to your skin. You'll hear the echo of drums that haven't played in over 3,000 years. And maybe, just maybe, you'll sense the faint presence of something that never wanted to be disturbed. You probably won't survive this one, at least, not without goosebumps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world fades. You're standing on a stretch of golden sand that seems endless, the horizon trembling in heat even though the sun is long gone. The desert night hums softly, crickets, wind, and the distant hiss of shifting dunes. The stars above feel impossibly close, sharp pinpricks against an ocean of black. Egypt breathes quietly beneath them, ancient and watchful. Somewhere in the distance lies the Valley of the Kings, carved deep into rock and memory. Beneath that ground sleeps Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh, the child of gods and whispers. His tomb lies sealed, cursed, and forgotten, or at least, it was supposed to be. You take a slow step forward, feeling your boots sink slightly into the soft sand. The night air smells dry, electric, like stone that's been waiting to speak. They called Tutankhamun Nebkheperur, meaning Lord of the Manifestation of Ra. Quite the title for someone who ruled before reaching adulthood. Historians still argue whether he was powerful or just a puppet. A fragile boy wearing the weight of divine expectation. Born into chaos, surrounded by scheming priests and fading gods, he was more symbol than ruler. But symbols have a way of outlasting empires. The wind picks up, carrying a low hum that almost sounds like chanting. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's the faint echo of rituals once performed for the sun god each dawn. You imagine priests in linen robes, holding bronze mirrors to catch the first light, whispering prayers over a young king who'd barely learned to speak as a god. It's strange, isn't it? The most famous pharaoh of all time wasn't remembered for his conquests or his reign, but for the discovery of his resting place thousands of years later. A teenager in gold, outlasting every empire that followed. The irony would make him smile, if he still could. You walk toward the valley now, each step stirring little ghosts of dust that dance around your feet. Somewhere below your path lies a network of tunnels, sealed chambers, and hidden shrines, all silent, all watching. Archaeologists say this desert preserves time like no other place on Earth. Moisture can't touch it, air barely breathes here, and every whisper stays trapped, waiting for a curious ear. A quirky fact: ancient Egyptians believed that naming someone kept their spirit alive. That's why Tutankhamun's name was carved and painted everywhere, to make sure he would never vanish. Ironically, it worked. Even after his dynasty tried to erase him, time couldn't. As you walk, the dunes shift subtly, almost like the ground itself remembers footsteps that passed long before yours. You pause, glance up at the stars, Orion gleaming over the Nile's ghostly curve. Egyptians saw those same stars as the home of Osiris, god of the afterlife. Somewhere in those lights, they believed their kings would live forever. The night deepens. The sound of the desert grows heavier, as if it's listening. You kneel and pick up a handful of sand. It slips between your fingers like time itself. You whisper Tutankhamun's name into the emptiness, and for a second, it feels like the wind pauses, holding its breath. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Because legends say his tomb was guarded by magic, spells woven in gold and lapis lazuli, curses hidden in plain hieroglyphs. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. That's how one translation goes. Most Egyptologists dismiss it as poetic nonsense. Still, historians argue whether it was meant metaphorically or not. You smile softly. Who knows? Maybe the pharaoh's silence is its own kind of curse. Behind you, the dunes whisper again. Ahead, the moonlight glows faintly on distant cliffs, the Valley of the Kings calling you closer. And somewhere deep beneath that rock, a door waits to be opened. You take a breath, steady, slow. Your journey into the Pharaoh's revenge has just begun. You make your way closer to the valley, guided only by the moon's silver glow spilling across the cliffs. The air here feels heavier, older, like you're walking through time itself. Each gust of wind seems to whisper 1,000 names, most of them long forgotten. You don't need a guide. Somehow, you just know where to go. The desert remembers your footsteps before you even take them. In the distance, faint outlines of tomb entrances emerge from the rock, some collapsed, others sealed tight with faded hieroglyphs. The Valley of the Kings, final resting place of Egypt's mightiest rulers, lies quiet and patient. Yet one tomb, one name, glows in your mind brighter than all the rest: Tutankhamun. The boy who was born a god and buried as a mystery. He wasn't meant to rule. Tutankhamun came into power around 1332 BCE, at the fragile age of 9. Egypt was fractured then, its religion broken, its gods cast aside by his father, Akhenaten, who dared to worship only one deity, Aten, the sun disk. Imagine being a child and inheriting that chaos. You, barely taller than a priest's staff, seated on a golden throne while courtiers whisper behind your back. Historians still argue whether it was really Tutankhamun who made decisions or the powerful advisors who moved him like a pawn. And yet, the boy did something monumental. He restored the old gods. In a move both political and deeply spiritual, he reopened the temples, revived the ancient rituals, and brought back Ammonius, Ra, and Osiris to their shrines. For a civilization built on divine order, this act must have felt like breathing again. People began to believe their world was realigned, the heavens back in harmony. And in that brief moment, the boy king shone like the rising sun. Still, beneath that golden mask of divine destiny, he was fragile, sickly even. Recent CT scans suggest Tutankhamun had a clubfoot, a cleft palate, and possibly malaria. The mighty pharaoh who once rode in gilded chariots may have struggled just to walk without pain. It's strange to think that behind the myth and magnificence was simply a young man with fragile bones and dreams far too large for his lifetime. The wind brushes past your face again, cool now, carrying with it the faint smell of stone dust and myrrh, the same resin used to embalm kings. Somewhere in the sand, maybe just a few meters away, lies his tomb, so modest, so small compared to the others. That's the irony, isn't it? The greatest archaeological treasure of the modern age was buried in one of the humblest graves. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Ancient Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence and emotion. So when Tutankhamun was mummified, they carefully removed his brain through the nose, but left his heart in place, because to face judgment before the gods, he'd need it weighed against the feather of truth. It's poetic in a morbid sort of way. You stop walking for a moment, gazing at the valley stretching before you. The stars overhead flicker like candles in an endless crypt. You imagine priests chanting inside temple halls, preparing Tutankhamun's body, wrapping each limb with linen and sacred spells. They'd whisper prayers to guide his soul safely into the afterlife, through gates guarded by serpent gods and crocodile demons. And all the while, they'd seal away his belongings, golden chariots, jewelry, thrones, even jars containing his organs, believing he'd need them again when he rose to rule beyond death. It's said that after his burial, his name was erased from monuments, his memory deliberately obscured. Pharaohs who followed tried to forget him, maybe out of politics, maybe fear. His tomb faded from records, and centuries of sand and stone buried it deeper into silence. For over 3,000 years, Tutankhamun slept undisturbed, his spirit drifting somewhere between memory and myth. You take another step, the ground crunching underfoot. The moonlight glints off something half-buried, a shard of pottery, maybe from an offering jar. You pick it up, brush away the dust, and feel the faint trace of carved symbols. A single hieroglyph, a scarab beetle, representing rebirth. You turn it in your hand, wondering how many centuries it's waited for another human touch. For a fleeting second, you think you hear laughter, soft, young, echoing faintly from the cliffs. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's the boy king himself, amused by how far you've come just to find him. The valley grows darker now, shadows pooling in the cracks between tombs. You can almost sense eyes on you, ancient, unblinking, watching from painted walls beneath your feet. Egypt's kings may be gone, but their silence has never really left. You tuck the pottery shard into your pocket. Something tells you you'll need it later. And as the desert wind sighs again, you realize you're no longer just walking through history. History is walking beside you. The night deepens as you reach the narrow gorge that leads into the Valley of the Kings. It feels like stepping into the ribs of the earth itself, dark, still, and echoing with centuries of silence. You can almost sense where the tomb of Tutankhamun lies beneath your feet, hidden for ages under shifting layers of sand and rock. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the pale starlight. The air is still, yet charged with an unseen hum, like something waiting to be remembered. Centuries passed after Tutankhamun's burial, and his tomb vanished from living memory. The grand temples of Thebes crumbled, the dynasties fell, and the sands slowly erased the footprints of priests and mourners alike. Historians still argue whether it was chance or fate that made his tomb survive untouched while others were looted beyond recognition. The truth might lie in simple geography. His resting place sat beneath the rubble of a later construction, hidden in plain sight. Imagine the ages slipping by. Traders come and go, empires rise and fall, and yet, beneath the valley's crust, a golden boy sleeps on. The world forgets his name, but the desert doesn't. Every grain of sand holds a piece of his story, a whisper of his reign. The priests who buried him thought they were sealing eternity. They didn't know eternity would someday open the door again. You tread further down the path, the wind curling softly around you. Somewhere up ahead, faint outlines of tomb entrances are carved into the cliffs, some decorated, others collapsed. Each doorway once guarded a passage to the afterlife, its walls painted with gods guiding the pharaoh toward rebirth. But Tutankhamun's tomb was different, smaller, simpler, almost hurried. Perhaps his death came too suddenly, leaving the artisans little time to prepare. His final resting place, KV-62, was modest, almost an afterthought, compared to the sprawling crypts of his ancestors. Yet maybe that's what saved it. A random gust of wind pushes loose sand against your legs, and for a heartbeat, you imagine you're watching time itself drift. The same kind of storm, centuries ago, might have buried the entrance so completely that even grave robbers gave up searching. That's the story scholars tell anyway, though some still claim the burial was deliberately concealed by priests who feared his desecration. You can almost picture them, hooded, whispering by torchlight, sealing the door with sacred resin, praying that no mortal hand would ever touch it again. You kneel beside a rock and run your fingers through the fine sand. It's cool now, soft as silk, but it carries a certain weight. Somewhere beneath it lies the threshold to the most famous discovery in archaeology. Funny to think that for thousands of years, people walked above this ground, unaware that one of the greatest treasures of human history was sleeping just a few meters below. A quirky historical note drifts into your thoughts. Early explorers of Egypt used to dig randomly, guided by rumor more than reason. Some even hired local tomb robbers as guides, bribing them for secrets passed through generations. Others relied on sheer luck, and luck, as it turns out, would play a huge part in what was coming. The desert begins to glow faintly now, as if touched by invisible firelight. You can almost see the flicker of torches from centuries past, workers carving hieroglyphs into limestone walls. They paint the journey of the soul, of Tutankhamun meeting Osiris, of the king rising as a star in the sky. Each brushstroke, each carved symbol, was a prayer frozen in time. You take a slow breath. The air tastes ancient, dry, mineral, eternal. It's strange to think that the boy who once ruled from a golden throne now lies surrounded by treasures he'd never see again. Gold masks, chariots, amulets, all buried for eternity, all waiting for rediscovery. Historians still argue whether his tomb was forgotten by accident or protected by intention. But the evidence of care is undeniable. The sealing of the entrance, the placement of the guardian statues, the layers of resin meant to harden like stone. Even after death, Tutankhamun was guarded as though he still commanded divine power. The moon has climbed high now, casting a cold glow over the valley. You find yourself standing where the floor dips slightly, A natural basin between cliffs. Something about the air here feels heavier, thicker. You can almost hear the faint sound of chisels, the ghosts of laborers who carved the stone and vanished into history. You glance down at your hands. The pottery shard you picked up earlier is still there, warm despite the chill. Its scarab carving glints faintly under moonlight. Rebirth. Resurrection. It almost feels like the desert is trying to tell you something about what waits beneath. Then, from somewhere deep within the valley, comes a sound. Faint. Hollow. Like a sigh escaping through a crack in the earth. You freeze. The wind stops. For a heartbeat, it feels as though the ground beneath you has shifted ever so slightly, settling or waking. You swallow hard and look toward the shadows. Somewhere in the darkness, buried beneath millennia of silence, the door to Tutankhamun's tomb still waits. You know what happens next. You've heard the stories of the man who found it. But standing here, in this quiet moment before history awakens, it feels more like destiny than discovery. You take a step forward. The sand sighs beneath your boots. The world is about to remember its forgotten king. The valley seems to hold its breath as you move deeper into the shadows, the cliffs closing in like stone sentinels. A soft orange light flickers ahead, lanterns glowing in the hands of men crouched low, their faces streaked with sweat and anticipation. You blink, and suddenly, it's not the present anymore. The sands shift around you, and you find yourself standing in 1922. Howard Carter is there, thin, meticulous, his khaki shirt clinging to him as he kneels beside a narrow trench. His hands, steady yet trembling, brush away dust with a small camel hair brush. He's been searching for years, chasing rumors and fragments of ancient clues, dismissed by most as a dreamer obsessed with a ghost. You crouch beside him, invisible but somehow part of the scene, the desert night pressing close. Nothing left in this valley, they told him. Every tomb's been found. But Carter didn't believe them. He'd studied maps, inscriptions, and old excavation notes. There was one gap, one untouched patch of ground near the tomb of Ramesses VI. Something felt wrong about it. Too quiet, too undisturbed. He couldn't explain why, but he knew something was buried there. For 5 relentless seasons he dug. Sandstorms buried his progress, funds ran dry. His patron, Lord Carnarvon, was ready to give up. Imagine that tension. You've dedicated years of your life to chasing whispers, and now your only sponsor is about to walk away. But Carter, stubborn as ever, convinced him to fund one last season. Just one more try. Historians still argue whether that decision was luck, instinct, or divine interference. But in November of 1922, Carter's team uncovered a stone step cut into the bedrock. Then another. And another. You feel a shiver run through the night. The steps seemed to descend straight into the heart of the valley, where nothing was supposed to remain. The men worked feverishly, the rhythmic scrape of tools echoing like a heartbeat beneath the cliffs. Dust filled the air, shimmering gold in the lantern light. You can almost smell it, the mix of sweat, oil, and ancient earth. They reached a sealed doorway plastered with mud, marked by the official necropolis seal, 2 figures of Anubis, the jackal god, guarding 9 bound captives. It wasn't just a door, it was a warning. Carter pressed his hand to the wall, and for a moment, you see the flicker of awe in his eyes. He whispered something you can't quite hear, maybe a prayer, maybe disbelief. Then he ordered the entrance recovered until Lord Carnarvon could arrive from England. For days, he waited, pacing like a man possessed. A quirky tidbit: Carter kept a canary in his tent, said to bring good luck. When the bird was killed by a cobra, a symbol of Egyptian royalty, locals whispered that the pharaoh's spirit had awakened. The curse, they said, had already begun. You glance at the horizon where the sun will rise in a few hours. The desert feels different now, heavier with expectation. Carnarvon arrived 2 weeks later, exhausted but eager. Together, they stood before the sealed door. The team cleared the last debris. The moment had come. Carter, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest, made a small hole in the plaster. He lit a candle and peered through the gap. Warm air rushed out, air untouched for more than 3 millennia. It brushed against his face like a sigh. "What do you see?" Carnarvon asked. Carter's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, wonderful things. You see it too, the faint glint of gold reflecting in the candlelight, shapes half buried in dust, a blur of treasure and mystery. Furniture, chariots, statues, all crammed into a chamber untouched since the time of Moses. It must have felt like standing at the edge of eternity, peeking into a God's forgotten world. That single moment changed history. The tomb of Tutankhamun had been found, intact, unplundered, impossible. And yet, as the candle flickers in your mind, you sense something else there in the dark. Something waiting. Watching. Historians still argue whether Carter noticed the curse inscriptions right away or ignored them. Maybe he thought they were superstition. Maybe he didn't care. But the old texts warned of death upon swift wings to any who disturbed the pharaoh's peace. You wonder if he felt a shiver then, even for a second. As you stand beside him, you can almost feel the weight of that unopened door pressing on your chest. Inside lies a boy king, asleep beneath a mask of gold, surrounded by treasures that once touched the hands of gods. Outside, the world is about to awaken the legend of a curse that will never sleep again. You step back slowly, the lantern light dimming behind you. The desert wind stirs, carrying a single whisper across the dunes, one word, ancient and eternal, remember. The night seems to tremble as the door gives way. The air that spills out is thick and strange, heavy with the scent of dust, resin, and something older, something not meant to be breathed again. You can almost feel it touch your skin, cold despite the desert heat. It's as though time itself has exhaled for the first time in over 3,000 years. Howard Carter lowers his candle into the gap, his breath shallow, eyes wide. The flame flickers against golden surfaces, against statues and chests piled like a treasure hoard in the dimness. Behind him, Carnarvon leans forward, unable to wait any longer. The men widen the hole, break the seal completely, and step into history. You follow, invisible, drifting behind their excitement like a silent witness. The small antechamber is crowded with unimaginable riches, gilded couches shaped like lions and bulls, alabaster jars, ceremonial fans, and strange hybrid creatures carved from ebony and ivory. Everything seems to glow faintly, the way dreams do when you first wake up. The explorers whisper in awe, their lanterns trembling in their hands. You can almost hear the desert sigh outside, the wind brushing past the entrance as though something unseen has slipped free. The first footprints in the tomb's dust, Carter's bootprints, join those left by ancient priests long dead. Between them, over 3,000 years of silence dissolves. Can you imagine this moment? You whisper to yourself. The first to stand where time stopped. Carter and his men move carefully, sketching, cataloging, photographing. Each artifact is mapped precisely before removal. He was no ordinary treasure hunter, his obsession was methodical. Still, even he can't hide the awe from his voice when he sees the sealed doorway at the far end of the chamber. The doorway that might lead to the burial room itself. It bears the same necropolis seal, the jackal, the captives. Another warning. He doesn't open it. Not yet. The room feels charged, electric. Everyone senses it, but no one dares speak. They close the tomb, resealing it until the official clearance can begin. Yet, even as they leave, the feeling follows them, the sense of being watched from within the shadows. A quirky historical fact drifts through your thoughts. When the tomb was first discovered, journalists weren't allowed inside. Carter had signed exclusive rights with the Times of London. This meant the rest of the world could only imagine what the tomb looked like, fanning the flames of curiosity and superstition. Newspapers printed wild theories, hidden mummies, secret curses, even whispers of ghosts. But for Carter and his crew, reality was stranger than any fiction. Each day they returned to the tomb, the atmosphere seemed heavier. Objects would shift slightly overnight. Lamps sputtered for no reason. Once, one of the workers swore he heard footsteps echoing from behind the sealed door. Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated or evidence of collective nerves. After all, they were breathing ancient air, surrounded by relics and shadows that carried the weight of gods. Superstition thrived easily in that darkness. Then came the day they opened the burial chamber. February 16, 1923. You stand there with them as they pry open the final door. The golden shrines gleam from within, stacked like puzzle boxes. 4 in total, nested one inside another, each covered in protective spells. The innermost shrine hides the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun. Carter steps forward, and for a heartbeat, everything feels still. The flame of his candle steadies, perfectly upright, no movement in the air. The silence feels aware. When the last shrine door opens, the light catches something extraordinary. A face, golden, serene, immortal. Tutankhamun's death mask stares back, eyes lined in lapis lazuli, lips calm as though whispering secrets to eternity. You feel a chill trace your spine. He looks almost alive. Carter exhales, a mix of awe and reverence. But deep in your chest, you sense something else stir, something colder, older, patient. Perhaps it isn't anger. Perhaps it's curiosity. After all, who could sleep for millennia and not wonder who dared to wake them? There's a phrase carved faintly on one of the guardian statues. He who disturbs the king's rest shall himself find no rest. Most experts dismiss it as symbolic. Still, the words seem to hum softly, vibrating in the air as though they've just been spoken. You step back, careful not to disturb the thin layer of dust covering the floor. It feels wrong to breathe here, wrong to speak. The explorers continue their work, oblivious to the invisible weight pressing down on the chamber. The boy king's eyes, empty but eternal, seem to follow you as you retreat toward the doorway. Outside, the sun begins to rise over the valley. Its light spills across the cliffs, brushing the sand with warmth. The desert, for the first time in ages, is awake. But deep within, in that golden chamber, something else has awakened too. You glance back one last time before leaving, the candlelight flickering faintly through the entrance. In that trembling glow, you could swear Tutankhamun's mask shifts ever so slightly, its mouth curving upward in what might be a smile. You stand just outside the tomb as Carter's team begins their meticulous work. The desert morning is quiet, but inside those chambers, it's as if the world is holding its breath. The flicker of lanterns dances against painted walls, the light sliding over gods and demons locked in eternal battle. The smell of ancient resin and linen fills the air, a strange sweetness that clings to your throat. You take a slow step forward. The antechamber is half cleared now, artifacts carefully numbered, sketches laid out on fragile paper. Each object seems to hum faintly in the stillness, as though alive with memory. The golden shrines, the alabaster lamps, the carved couches shaped like mythical beasts, every piece whispers of ritual, of faith, of a civilization that refused to let death be the end. Carter works silently, his notebook clutched close, his focus absolute. Yet even he seems uneasy. The tomb feels different now. Every sound echoes too loudly. Every shadow feels too long. Historians still argue whether this was just exhaustion or something more. The human mind plays tricks, they say, especially when surrounded by the dead. But you can't shake the feeling that something unseen moves just beyond the lantern glow, something that doesn't appreciate being watched. The burial chamber looms ahead, and you follow Carter as he steps inside. The walls are covered with brilliant murals, the boy king before Osiris, the god of the afterlife, priests performing the opening of the mouth ceremony to awaken the spirit, golden hieroglyphs gleaming like stars. You trace your fingers over one scene, Tutankhamun receiving the breath of life from Anubis. The paint is still vivid, as if freshly laid. A quirky detail comes to mind. Ancient Egyptian artists painted with mineral pigments that don't fade easily, malachite for green, lapis for blue, ochre for red and gold. The same stones once ground for these murals still glitter in the nearby cliffs. You're literally surrounded by the palette of eternity. Carter kneels near the sarcophagus now, its granite surface cool and massive. 4 gilded shrines have already been dismantled to reach it, each one sealed with cords and protective spells. The carvings are both beautiful and ominous, snakes, winged deities, and strange hieroglyphs that seem to shimmer when the lantern light catches them. He leans closer to read one line aloud, "May your spirit live forever, and may none disturb your eternal rest." He doesn't even flinch. He just scribbles in his notebook. But you notice one of the Egyptian workers quietly backing away, muttering a prayer under his breath. And then, a sound, a faint rustle, almost like fabric shifting. Everyone freezes. The lanterns flicker. You glance toward the shadowed corner of the room, half expecting to see something move. But there's only silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums. The curse, of course, is a modern legend. There was no written official curse inside the tomb. But stories spread fast. When Carter's pet canary was killed by a cobra, the pharaoh's symbol, locals called it a warning. And when Lord Carnarvon, the expedition sponsor, died suddenly from a mosquito bite that turned septic, the world erupted in hysteria. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the king. Newspapers quoted breathlessly, though no such inscription truly existed. Still, the coincidences piled up. Carnarvon's dog howled and dropped dead in England the night his master died. Lights in Cairo flickered and went out. A messenger stumbled and broke a priceless artifact. Rational minds offered explanations, but fear has always loved a good story. Historians still argue whether these tales were media inventions or something stranger. Psychosomatic fear, environmental toxins from sealed tomb air, or just bad luck. Science calls it coincidence. The desert might call it justice. As Carter opens the sarcophagus, the air feels heavier, almost liquid. You watch him remove the granite lid, revealing 3 nested coffins, 2 of gilded wood, 1 of solid gold. Inside lies Tutankhamun himself, wrapped in layers of linen and perfumed resin. His mask gleams beneath the candlelight, a face that is both human and divine. You step closer, staring into those calm golden features. For a fleeting second, you swear the eyes move, just slightly, following the flicker of flame. Your pulse quickens. You look again and they're still. Maybe it's just the candlelight. Maybe not. Carter exhales slowly, his voice barely audible. "The boy king," he murmurs, almost reverently. Untouched by time. You imagine the pharaoh's soul, Ka and Ba, stirred awake by the intrusion. For the Egyptians, death wasn't an end, it was a journey. The soul traveled through gates and trials before merging with the stars. But to reach peace, the body had to remain intact, the tomb undisturbed. And now, his eternal stillness has been broken. The shadows shift slightly as you back away. You can feel it, something in the air watching, listening. It doesn't feel malevolent, not yet. Just aware. Curious. Outside, the valley glows with sunlight again, the cliffs golden and silent. But the stillness isn't the same anymore. Somewhere deep inside the mountain, a doorway stands open, and a promise older than memory begins to stir. You close your eyes and listen. The desert wind carries a sound, a whisper too soft to translate. But if you had to guess, it would say something like this. "You've seen what you came for. Now leave before we wake." You awaken the next morning to the sound of murmurs and footsteps echoing through the camp. The desert sun is merciless, and yet a strange chill hangs in the air. The discovery has shaken the world. Photographers, scientists, journalists, all descending upon the valley like moths to a flame. But even among the bustle of excitement, there's an unease that clings to everyone's breath. Something's not right. You walk toward Carter's tent, where the flap is half open, flapping weakly in the wind. Inside, papers are strewn across a table, sketches of the tomb, catalog lists, fragile photographs of golden shrines and jeweled statues. A single candle burns low beside his cot, melted down into a puddle of wax. Carter himself looks exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his face pale under the desert light. He hasn't slept. No one has. Outside, someone shouts, a messenger rushing across the sand. Lord Carnarvon is dead. The news hits the camp like a curse made flesh. A simple mosquito bite, they say, that became infected. But rumor travels faster than reason. People whisper that the moment he died, the lights in Cairo flickered and went dark. That his favorite dog, back in England, howled once before collapsing. You can't help but feel the desert wind pause, as if listening. Coincidence, Carter mutters, more to himself than anyone. His voice trembles just slightly. Just coincidence. But you're not so sure. The workers begin to leave. Some refuse to enter the tomb again. The valley, once alive with discovery, now feels haunted. At night, strange things happen. Lanterns go out. Footsteps echo where no one walks. Once, you hear the faint sound of something metallic dragging across stone, deep below. Historians still argue whether these tales were exaggerations or symptoms of collective hysteria. Rational minds point to bacteria, Aspergillus flavus, they call it, a deadly fungus that might have grown inside the sealed tomb for centuries. Inhaling it could cause infections, fevers, hallucinations. Science has an answer for everything, it seems. But science doesn't explain the whispering. Carter continues his work regardless, stubborn as ever. You follow him into the tomb again one late afternoon. The air is cooler now, still thick with the scent of resin and dust. The golden mask has been lifted, the coffin's opened. The mummy of Tutankhamun rests before you, thin, fragile, blackened by the embalming oils of eternity. For a moment you look into his face, what's left of it, and you almost feel pity. This was just a boy, no older than 19 when he died. A boy born into impossible divinity, now reduced to dust and myth. You wonder what he'd think of all this, of the crowds, the flashbulbs, the whispers of a curse. Maybe he'd smile at the irony. Maybe he'd be furious. A quirky tidbit flickers in your memory. When X-rays were first taken of Tutankhamun's body in 1968, researchers discovered a wound at the base of his skull. Some thought it was proof of murder, others said it was a mistake made during mummification. Historians still argue about it to this day. But back in 1923, Carter didn't have that luxury, only a sense of reverence and dread. You run your hand along the carved walls, feeling the raised hieroglyphs under your fingertips. One line catches your attention, a phrase so faint it's barely legible. The one who crosses into eternity shall rise again when remembered. It's not a curse. It's a promise. You step back, the flicker of your lantern catching the boy king's golden eyes once more. And then, without warning, the flame sputters and dies. The darkness is absolute. For a moment, you can't breathe. You hear a faint shuffle, fabric brushing stone, maybe just the movement of air. Or maybe not. You reach for your lighter, but it slips from your hand. When you finally relight the lantern, everything looks the same. And yet, something feels off. The mummy's head, you think, is turned ever so slightly toward you. You tell yourself it's your imagination. The mind plays tricks in the dark. But as you leave the chamber, you hear something soft, distant, like laughter echoing through the stone corridors. It's not loud enough to be real. Just a breath of sound. Just enough to raise the hairs on your neck. That night, the wind howls across the valley. The tents flap violently, sand biting at your skin. Carter sits alone outside his tent, staring toward the cliffs. It's all nonsense, he whispers again, though no one has asked. The lantern beside him flickers, struggling against the wind. You follow his gaze toward the tomb's entrance, now sealed again with boards and ropes. For a second, you think you see something standing just beyond the entrance. A faint golden shimmer, almost human-shaped. Then the light wavers, and it's gone. You lie awake for hours, listening to the desert breathe. Every gust of wind sounds like a sigh. Every shift of sand feels like a step. You tell yourself it's just the heat, just exhaustion, but deep down you know better. You've disturbed something ancient, something that doesn't fade with time. And now it knows your name. Days blend into weeks, and the valley feels different now, less like a site of discovery, more like a graveyard breathing through its own dust. The thrill of fame has cooled, replaced by unease. Cairo newspapers shout, "Pharaoh's curse strikes again," while rational minds scramble for explanations. You walk through camp, hearing workers mutter in low tones, eyes darting toward the tomb as if it might blink. The deaths continue. A radiologist who x-rayed the mummy collapses suddenly from blood poisoning. Another visitor, struck down by a mysterious fever. Even Carter's friend, who once jokingly touched the coffin and said, "Guess I'll risk it," dies months later of pneumonia. Statistically, it could all be coincidence, but coincidence starts to sound like denial after the 10th time. You can't shake the feeling that something unseen hums beneath the sand, a vibration just low enough to feel in your bones. Sometimes, when you walk near the tomb's sealed entrance, you think you hear a faint heartbeat. Or maybe that's just the echo of your own. Carter refuses to believe in curses. He works like a man possessed, cataloging every bead, every scarab, every scrap of linen. He insists the curse is nonsense, a story cooked up by bored journalists. Superstition thrives where evidence is absent, he says dryly one night, sketching by lamplight. But his hands tremble when the lamp flickers. Historians still argue whether Carter himself ever began to doubt. His private journals from that period are filled with strange notes, references to dreams, to a presence in the burial chamber, to the soft movement of shadows. One entry simply reads, "It watches." You find yourself drawn to the tomb again. You know you shouldn't go, but curiosity has its own gravity. The entrance yawns before you, boards creaking slightly in the wind. Inside, the air is still cool, but there's a scent of something new, ozone, like the air before a storm. Your lantern's glow crawls across the walls, illuminating the painted scenes, gods judging souls, boats gliding through the underworld, Tutankhamun himself standing before Osiris. His painted eyes seem to follow you as you move deeper. The silence feels dense, thick enough to press against your ears. You reach the burial chamber again. The sarcophagus now stands open and empty, the mummy moved for study. The walls seem to breathe in the light, colors still vivid after all these centuries. You notice something faintly etched into the corner, a hieroglyph that wasn't visible before. It looks newly carved. A single symbol, the Eye of Horus. Protector of the dead. Except the direction is reversed. The eye isn't watching outward. It's turned inward as though something on the other side now peers back. A shiver crawls down your spine. You step closer, raising the lantern, and for a moment you swear the reflection on the golden shrine moves, like the faint silhouette of a young boy standing right behind you. You turn fast, but there's nothing there. Only air and silence. You breathe deeply, trying to steady your nerves. Maybe this is what Carter felt, the thin line between discovery and delirium, between knowledge and obsession. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Years later, a journalist interviewing one of the surviving diggers claimed that every night after work, the team heard faint chanting from within the valley. Archaeologists said it was the wind sweeping through the limestone cliffs, creating eerie tones. Locals said it was the priests, still guarding their king. You take one last look around the chamber. The gold glows faintly, the painted gods frozen mid-motion. Then, as you turn to leave, your lantern flares, too bright, too sudden. The flame stretches long, blue at its core, casting wild shadows across the walls. For an instant, you see movement everywhere, figures bowing, a boy king standing tall, his crown gleaming in the impossible light. And then silence. Darkness again. Your knees weaken, your pulse hammering in your ears. You stumble out, breath ragged. The air outside feels thin, unreal, as though the desert itself is holding its breath. The sun dips below the cliffs, painting everything blood orange. For a moment, you think you see the faint shimmer of gold ripple across the sand, as though the valley itself still remembers the pharaoh's dream. Historians will call it hallucination, exhaustion, sunstroke. But deep inside, you know something has shifted. The tomb is awake now. The boy king is no longer content to sleep. You close your eyes and in the darkness, you see him again. Tutankhamun, not as a corpse, but alive, walking through his chamber, his sandals silent on the stone. He turns toward you, his voice a whisper brushing your thoughts. You wanted to know me. Now you will. The desert wind sighs, warm and endless, carrying with it a whisper that sounds almost like laughter. The days that follow feel dreamlike, unreal, as if the whole valley has slipped between waking and memory. You try to tell yourself it's the heat, the exhaustion, the tension of endless work, but the dreams won't stop. Each night, you find yourself standing in the same place, the burial chamber. The golden mask gleams before you, eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. And always, a voice, quiet, steady, impossibly calm, murmurs your name as if it has known it for centuries. When you wake, you still taste the tomb's dry air in your throat. You tell no one, of course. Carter would only scoff. But you notice he looks worse too, thinner, paler. Sometimes he mutters in his sleep. Once, you catch him whispering in the dark, "It's not anger, it's awareness." In the daylight, he throws himself into his work. The treasures are carefully packed and shipped downriver toward Cairo, each item labeled and catalogued. The mask of Tutankhamun leaves the tomb under heavy guard, glinting beneath the sun like liquid fire. Crowds gather to glimpse it, awestruck. You follow along, watching as the boat drifts down the Nile, cutting through the still water. For a moment, the whole river seems to shimmer gold. A historical note flickers in your mind. When Tutankhamun ruled Egypt around 1332 BCE, the capital was Thebes, and the empire stretched across Nubia and the Levant. Yet his reign was short, overshadowed by his father, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who had forced Egypt to worship only one god, Aten. After Akhenaten's death, the priests restored the old gods and buried his memory. Tutankhamun's name, restored on temple walls, symbolized Egypt's return to balance. Irony, isn't it? That balance now lies shattered again. Carter may not say it aloud, but you sense it. Every time he looks at the artifacts, there's a flicker of doubt. What if disturbing them truly upset something sacred? Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians believed curses were literal or symbolic warnings. Some say they were psychological deterrents, others claim they carried ritual weight, spells designed to bind spiritual energy to protect the dead. You don't need a debate to know which one feels true now. On the voyage to Cairo, the nights grow colder. The river seems alive, whispering softly against the wooden hull. Once, when you lean over the edge, you think you see a reflection in the black water, not your own, but the boy king's face, golden and calm. He's looking straight up at you, his eyes lit by an unseen glow. You blink, and it's gone. Only ripples remain. When you reach Cairo, the museum buzzes with anticipation. Crates are unloaded, guards posted, scholars summoned. But strange things begin to happen again. A technician slips from a ladder and breaks his leg. Another faints, claiming he heard chanting from inside a sealed box. Even the museum cat, usually aloof, refuses to go near the artifacts, hissing at empty air. Carter brushes it off with irritation. People see what they want to see, he mutters. Yet that night, you see him sitting alone in the storage hall, staring at the golden mask by lantern light. His expression is unreadable. You almost ask what he's thinking, but before you can, he whispers something under his breath. You only catch the last few words. Forgive the intrusion. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your thoughts. Years after the excavation, researchers discovered traces of flammable oils and perfumes on the mummy, substances that may have spontaneously combusted when first exposed to air, explaining the darkened, almost charred state of Tutankhamun's body. Some say that was the real curse. Chemistry and decay misread as mysticism. Yet even so, science can't explain the weight you feel now, standing beside that mask. It's not fear, exactly. It's reverence wrapped in unease. You reach out, almost without thinking, your fingertips hovering inches above the glass display case. The mask gleams faintly, its expression serene, timeless. The lips curve just slightly, too slightly, and for one impossible second, you're sure you see them move. Why did you wake me? The whisper is so soft you almost convince yourself you imagined it. But the sound lingers, not in your ears, but deep in your chest, where the heartbeat once echoed in the tomb. You step back sharply, knocking against a crate. The noise echoes through the empty hall. Carter looks up from his desk, eyes wide. He doesn't ask what's wrong. He doesn't need to. Later that night, when you finally close your eyes, the voice returns, stronger now, closer. You see the tomb again, the gold, the painted gods, the boy king's face hovering above you in the darkness. And this time, the voice doesn't whisper. It commands, "Return me." Your eyes snap open. The air in the tent is still, suffocating. Outside, the desert wind has stopped. No sound, no movement, just silence, vast, ancient, waiting. And beneath it all, You can almost hear the faint scrape of sand shifting, as though something is slowly, patiently rising. You feel the weight of centuries pressing on your shoulders as you follow the trail of Tutankhamun's story into the modern age. His tomb has been opened, the treasures catalogued, yet the pharaoh's presence lingers, persistent, unyielding. Advances in science now reveal what Carter and his team could only guess at. CT scans, DNA tests, and digital reconstructions bring the boy king back to life, pixel by pixel, bone by fragile bone. And still, there's something missing. Something the machines can't capture. You watch the glowing screen as researchers overlay a 3D reconstruction on his skull, sculpting flesh over bone. He blinks, or rather, the model does. His almond-shaped eyes seem impossibly aware, staring into nothing, into you. Science calls it imagination, but you feel it as a chill, a subtle brush of something alive. Scholars still argue whether these reconstructions honor the past or risk awakening echoes of the sacred that were meant to remain buried. DNA analysis reveals a tangled family tree: Akhenaten, the heretic, the enigmatic mother, and a mysterious series of half-siblings. Tutankhamun had genetic maladies, cleft palate, clubfoot, malaria, that likely contributed to his early death. But he was also resilient, a symbol of restoration and divine order. You can almost hear him laughing softly, incredulous that modern science is piecing together a story that he lived and died within such a fragile frame. A quirky fact surfaces. When scientists reconstructed his face digitally, they found a slight asymmetry in his smile. One corner of the mouth rises just a fraction higher. You wonder if that's how he would have smirked at a scribe making a mistake, or at a priest trying too hard to impress him. History captures the grand and the eternal, but it can never capture those tiny human details unless you imagine them. The museum now houses his treasures. His mask, the sarcophagus, his golden throne, they gleam under glass, untouchable, immortal. And yet, some nights, guards report strange feelings. A sudden chill, whispers too low to interpret, or the faint sensation of eyes following them across the room. Scientists shrug. Historians debate. Psychologists suggest collective hysteria. The desert whispers a different story. You wander through the exhibits, imagining Tutankhamun watching silently, still judging, still aware. He sees the glimmer of gold and the gaze of visitors, the cameras flashing like sunbeams on his face. There's a persistence in his presence that defies death, a quiet power in the aura of a boy king who outlived empires and dynasties. Carter's meticulous notes, preserved and studied, hint at another layer. The inscriptions on the tomb's walls, the so-called curse, might not have been threats at all. Instead, they could be guardianship spells, binding energy to protect his soul. You wonder, do these protections still hum faintly through the artifacts? And if so, what happens when science, curiosity, or greed interferes again? Historians still argue whether the curse is myth, coincidence, or spiritual law, but the artifacts themselves seem indifferent. Their golden surfaces gleam, cold, reflecting both awe and unease. You run your fingers along the display glass, imagining the touch of the boy king's real hands beneath layers of linen, resin, and centuries. And then, in a whisper you cannot ignore, you feel it, awareness. Not anger, not malice, just recognition. Tutankhamun sees you. He knows you've come this far. Perhaps he even approves. Perhaps he simply waits. Digital reconstruction or living spirit, history or legend, science or superstition, the boy king's story refuses to stay buried. Every scan, every photograph, every visitor's gaze breathes him back into the world, if only for a moment. You step back, heart thudding. Outside, the world goes about its business. Inside, golden eyes glint, serene, eternal, quietly reminding you, even when you think history is gone, some kings never really sleep. The story doesn't end with discovery, display, or digital reconstruction. It ripples outward, touching everyone who dares to look, to imagine, to believe. You wander the quiet museum halls late at night, the polished floors echoing your footsteps. The golden mask gleams faintly under the soft security lights, untouched yet alive in the mind. You can almost hear the faint rustle of linen, the whisper of a boy king settling back into his eternal vigil. Carter's notes, now bound and archived, reveal a meticulous obsession: measurements, sketches, inscriptions, catalogued hieroglyphs. Yet among all the data, you notice the recurring words he scribbled in a corner: watching, waiting, remembering. They seem less like documentation and more like confession. Perhaps Carter understood, deep down, that some presences don't rest simply because the body does. Even in the modern world, the artifacts carry an aura. Psychologists call it the aura effect, the inexplicable sense of being observed by history itself. Visitors feel it instinctively, a weight in the chest or a shiver along the spine. Guards report strange dreams. Cleaners hear whispers in empty halls. A quirky historical tidbit: when the mask toured internationally, several staff claimed to wake up with impressions of golden eyes in their minds, a lingering presence that persisted for hours. Science scoffs. You know better. Outside, the Nile flows timelessly, carrying stories of Pharaoh's past. Inside, Tutankhamun sleeps in layers of resin, linen, and gold, yet he is not gone. His story, of restoration, of youth and frailty, of empire and devotion, still moves through time like the gentle current of the river. Historians still argue whether his fame is owed to the boy king himself or to the accident of his tomb remaining untouched, a miracle of circumstance. Either way, he is eternal in our memory. You pause before the golden mask, imagining the pharaoh as he once was: a boy, barely 19, riding through a palace, feeling both the weight of gods and the vulnerability of flesh. You imagine the priests whispering protective spells, the rituals that ensured his safe passage to the afterlife, and the delicate balance of belief and fear that shaped his brief, extraordinary life. And then, quietly, the museum fades. You are back in the valley at night, sand whispering underfoot, stars overhead like countless distant candles. Somewhere deep below, the tomb rests intact. A shiver runs through you as a thought surfaces. Perhaps this is where he truly sleeps, not in a museum, not in gold, but in memory, in stories, in the careful gaze of those who remember him. The desert wind rises gently, carrying the faintest hint of myrrh. You breathe deeply, and for the first time since you arrived, you feel a measure of calm. The boy king's world, though interrupted, endures. The treasures, the curses, the whispers, they are all part of a timeless echo. And in that echo, you sense a quiet peace, a gentle reminder that history is never truly silent. As you take your last step back, a soft golden shimmer touches your vision. For a brief, perfect moment, Tutankhamun seems to smile, not as a threat, not as a ghost, but as a boy who has finally been remembered. You whisper a word of thanks, and the desert exhales. The desert night stretches infinitely, soft and silent, like a blanket draped over the world. You walk slowly now, each step deliberate, feeling the cool sand shift beneath your feet. The air carries the faint aroma of myrrh and stone, mingling with the quiet hum of distant stars. Somewhere far off, the valley breathes in the gentle rhythm of eternity, a pulse that reaches even into your chest. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your mind drift. The golden mask, the painted walls, the treasures, all begin to fade into the darkness behind your eyelids. You imagine Tutankhamun not as a figure of legend, but as a boy, asleep beneath linen wrappings, dreaming his own dreams, untouchable and safe in the arms of time. The whispers, the shadows, the stories, they grow softer, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Each breath feels lighter now, carried on the cool desert wind. You sense history settling back into its rhythm, the world pausing to let the pharaoh rest. And though the memory of discovery, of awe, lingers, it does so without weight or fear. The echoes of the past whisper quietly, like gentle lullabies, fading gradually into nothing but soft, eternal stillness. You stretch your legs, feeling the tension leave your body. The stars above seem to wink, as if approving your quiet retreat. The sands beneath your feet hum a gentle tune, a rhythm older than human memory, a song of time and patience and the unbroken cycle of life and memory. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize that the boy king sleeps again, watched, remembered, protected. You smile softly, your pulse slowing, the desert cradling you in its eternal calm. One last breath, one last whisper of wind, and the world feels infinite, safe, and hushed.